on when you're watching this broadcast live here from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Leon Rock, and this is All Things Black Politics, where we talk about politics both in Boston and across the country. And actually, we're going to talk about politics in Washington, D.C., particularly in another part of the country as well, and that is Florida. Well, why do I want to talk about Florida? Because something is going on in Florida that is unusually insane, just crazy, my good friends. And it's going to have impact on what goes on in every part of the country, I believe, moving forward. Yeah. You've heard of a guy that wants to be president. Well, there's a couple of people that want to be president. The current president of the United States, he wants to stay in that position as president of the United States. I'm not too sure if he's capable of doing it, but I guess what? It's better than the alternatives, my good friends. And that is two people that are running for president on the Republican side. One being, well, the criminal. Yes, the person that is indicted and may get indicted again, and that is the former, what he termed the president of the United States, Donald Trump. Yeah, I despise even saying his name, but my concern and my interest right now is going to the issue of Florida and the other candidate that is running for, president of the United States. Yeah, and that is the current governor of Florida. Yeah, you know who this guy is. Yeah, it's Ron DeSantis. Yeah, Ron DeSantis, he's running for governor of, well, he's running for actually president of the United States. He's currently Florida governor. Yeah, he wants to be the 2024 Republican presidential candidate that gets chosen by the American people to lead this country. It's sad, but it's true that something is going on in Florida that will have ramifications across the United States. You've heard the reports, my good friends, but let's cover it for a minute here on Boston Black News, All Things Black Politics. Yeah, there's a new sheriff in town in Florida, as Ron DeSantis loves to say, and that new sheriff is essentially asking and telling, in many ways, that Florida has a new standard of teaching students about Black history. Oh, yeah, Black history in America. Some Black people have benefited from slavery. That's what the new standard of Florida says, that some Black people benefited from slavery because they were taught useful skills. I can't make this stuff up, my good friends. I just can't. Actually, can anyone make this stuff up? Yeah. The standards, which were blasted by statewide teachers union as a step backwards, were approved Wednesday by the State Board of Education for, the state of Florida. Oh, but by the way, it's been Ron DeSantis that has been pushing this idea for many years. You see, Florida's public schools will now teach students that some Black people benefited from slavery because they were taught useful skills, part of a new American history standard approved Wednesday that, yes, was blasted by state teachers union as a step backwards. The Florida State Board of Education's new standards includes the controversial language about how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Can you make this stuff up, my good friends? I can't. According to the 216-page document about the state's 2023 standards in social studies posted on the Florida Department of Education's website, other language that is drawn an ear from educators and education advocates includes teaching about how Black people were also the perpetrators of violence during race massacres. Did you hear me? Oh, Black folks were lynched in the United States and in Florida. And because they fought back against the lynching, against the destroying of Black neighborhoods across the United States. See, in Florida, the little children are now going to learn that the perpetrators of violence was actually Black people. Did you hear me? The perpetrators of violence, racial violence by slave owners was justified as Black people were the perpetrators of violence during race massacres. What kind of gobbledygook garbage is this? The language also says that instruction includes acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans, but is not limited to the 1906 Atlanta race riot, the 1919 Washington, D.C. race riot, the 1920 Okie massacre, or the 1921 Tulsa massacre, or the 1923 Rosewood massacre. They're not going to talk about any of those massacres of Black folks. You see, the Florida Education Association, a statewide teachers union representing over 150,000 teachers, called these standards a disservice to Florida's students and a big step backwards for the state that has required teaching African-American history since 1994. Well, wait a minute. So before 1994, in Florida, you didn't get educated about Black history. That was like, what? Now we're going backwards. So wait a minute, 1994, count the years. 30 years? So for 30 years, educators in Florida educated us, or African Americans in Florida, as well as others, about the, I would assume, the proud history of Black America and some of the challenges in Black America regarding slavery, and actually, in many ways, educating themselves, I'm talking about others, about the not so nice challenges of slavery. Well, there's more. Some are questioning, how can students ever be equipped for the future if they don't have a full, honest picture of where we have come from? The union is saying Florida students deserve world-class education that equips them to be successful adults who can help heal our nation's divisions rather than deepening them, says Andrew Spar, president of the union over there in Florida. Yeah. Governor DeSantis, I don't even like to even call him a governor. But DeSantis is pursuing a political agenda guaranteed to set good people against one another. And the process he's cheating our kids on is not nice. They deserve the full truth of American history, the good and the bad, says Mr. Spar, who is the representative of the teachers union, who does not like what Governor DeSantis is doing, and neither should we. I am so surprised that African Americans have not come together against this toxic fool. Yes, I called it a toxic fool. Dealing with toxic foolishness, the union said it is troubling that high school level standards conflate the 1920 Okie massacres when at least 30 African Americans were killed for attempting to vote, with acts of violence perpetrated against African Americans. And in middle school, the standards required that students be taught slavery was beneficial. I'm going to say it again. In the middle schools in Florida, who lives in Florida, by the way? I got family in Florida. A whole bunch of Black folks live in Florida. But I wonder what the crap is happening in Florida with Black folks not coming together and saying enough is enough. You see, the middle schools in Florida require that students be taught slavery was beneficial to African Americans because it helped them develop skills. Yeah. You see, because here's the deal. Updates to the curriculum were mandated by a controversial law in 2022 that Governor Ron DeSantis dubs as Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act. Did you hear that? He dubbed it Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, or Stop Woke Act. Yeah, Stop Woke Act. The spokesperson for Florida's Department of Education said on Thursday, in response to questions about this decision about African American history standards, and in a statement by Dr. William Allen and Dr. Francis Presley Rice, who were members of the Florida African American History Standards Work Group, one of the new standards were defended in a statement as comprehensive and rigorous introduction to African American history. This is the craziest madness I've ever heard of. I'd love to know who this Dr. Francis Presley Rice is. I'm gonna look her up, or him. Francis can be a man or a woman, right? The intent, says the State Department of Education, is that this particular benchmark clarification is to show that some slaves develop highly specialized skills from which they benefited. This is factual and well documented, it added. What kind of Yeah, listen, these folks have lost their minds. The statement continues, some examples of how slaves benefited from slavery includes blacksmiths like Ned Cobb, Henry Blair, Lewis Latimer, and John Henry, shoemakers like James Fortin, Paul Koff, and Betty Washington Lewis, fishing and shipping industry, workers like Jupiter Hammond, John Chavis, William Whisper, and Crispus Attucks. Yeah, you know, that brother that died in Boston was called the Boston Massacre. Tailors like Elizabeth Keekley, James Thomas, and Mary Ada Carter, and teachers like Betsy Stockton and, yes, Booker T. Washington. Yeah, if slavery didn't exist, they're saying that none of these people that were slaves wouldn't have picked up the skills. Well, hold on, wait a minute. How about no slavery and providing opportunities for people to pick up skills? There was no need for slavery to better Black folks. What kind of crock, doodle crock is that? Yeah. The state went on to say that it's disappointing that some distractors would devalue the research from the work group and reduce it to a few isolated expressions without context. More intellectual garbage. Representatives for Governor DeSantis could not be reached recently for comment as of a couple of days ago. In January, get this, Ron DeSantis' administration blocked a new advanced placement course on African-American studies from being taught in high school, saying it violated state law and was historically inaccurate. The state pointing to 6 areas of concern and works by Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, and other Black authors. And in other words, hey, take out all Black. Again, take out all Black books, anything written by Black folks that is progressive and informative. Let's take it out of the system. Take it out of the system. Yeah. Same month is DeSantis and the Department of Education's commissioner, Manny Diaz Jr., discussed the issue at a news conference. They said that the course was the Trojan horse for indoctrinating students with left-wing ideology on the guise of teaching about Black experience and Black history. The color purple. Out. W.E.B. Du Bois, the Philadelphia Negro. Out. Yeah. Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X. Out. Anything that talks about Black folks and our experiences, fact, out. It's disgraceful, my good friends. This is happening in America. Florida, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Mississippi, Alabama, Michigan, New Orleans, Texas, and places in between. These issues are coming full circle in the African American community. Now the question is, what are we as African Americans going to do about it? This is All Things Black Politics. This is Leon Rock. I'm your host, talking politics, and more politics live here from Washington, D.C. on All Things Black Politics, talking about Ron DeSantis, talking about Florida, and the decisions made by, the Florida Department of Education, supported by Ron DeSantis. The academic standards approved, Wednesday at a meeting of the Florida Board of Education and designed to guide lessons from kindergarten through high school. As I indicated earlier, this 216-page social studies curriculum includes teaching how many Black people have positively been influenced and contributed to the country, on the causes of and consequences of the slave trade, and on civil rights advancements made throughout the African American history. But it is whitewashed, my good friends. Fact is, these revisions have caused educators and civil rights activists and advocates to have extreme concerns. When students are instructed on various studies of trades and performed by slaves, lessons must include how these skills in some instances could have been applied for their personal benefit. That's what the language is saying, my good friends. In Florida, and during lessons on growth and destruction of Black communities during the Reconstruction period, including events like the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, students must be made aware on how violence was perpetrated both against and by African Americans. Really? So the Tulsa Massacre, which Black folks were essentially bombed into oblivion, and they began to protect their families. That was an act of violence for protecting your family. What kind of cockamamie stuff is that, my good friends? Well, Andrew Spar, the president of the Florida Education Association, is right. How can our students ever be equipped for the future if they don't have a full, honest picture of where we come from? Now, Mr. Spar alleges that the changes are cheating kids who deserve full truth about American history, the good and the bad. And by the way, that shouldn't be alleged, that's a fact. In Florida and in Texas and places in between that are changing the way we educate our people. There's a challenge, my good friends. But here is the question. What is the Black community going to do? Well, aren't you tired of having others educate us about ourselves anyway? Isn't that supposed to be, in many ways, something that we teach at home? Because if we're relying on others to teach our true history, well, who's the fool? That's my question, is who's the fool? Now, there's more. Now, I said who's the fool? And I know that the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is having, NAACP is having a conference in Boston, Massachusetts. And they're taking a strong position on this, I guess. You see, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a civil rights group, said that the standards convey a sanitized and dishonest telling of history of the slavery in America. Oh, that's the only thing that they can come up with. Sheesh. Come on now. NAACP, you got to do better. That's your statement. That's it. That's it. That's all, I guess. Again, the National Association, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, says that the standards convey a sanitized and dishonest telling of history of slavery in America. Well, we knew that, NAACP. Tell us more. Tell us something we don't know. A statement provided to Reuters news service, Reuters, on Thursday. William Allen and Francis Presley Rice, members of the working group that developed this new guideline, said the language on skills was meant to show that those enslaved were not merely victims. Holy moly! These folks are supposed to be educators. They're educated fools. Yeah, I said it. I can't wait to see Frances Presley Rice, and I'm not sure if she's African American or not. I'm going to look her up. You should too. And then this guy, William Allen, both doctors of whatever education. Well, they're both saying, hey, guess what? The language and skills were meant to show that those enslaved were not merely victims. Well, who were they then? If you're enslaved, you are a victim. That's a fact. And it doesn't make a difference if it was African American enslavement, any type of enslavement. You are the victim. What kind of nonsense is that? This is All Things Black Politics, live here from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Leon Rock, and I'm talking about this whole issue of Ron DeSantis. Oh, I'm a little fired up this morning because this one is making me some kind of sick. Yeah, you can call in. Call-in number is 301-715-8592. There it is right there. Let me point to it. 301. What is that? The 301-715-8592. I think that's it right there. You can see it right there. Call in. Oh, and by the way, there's the QR code. Scan that QR code, you'll get all the information, and you'll be able to log in to have a conversation with me about this issue of Ron DeSantis and him acting a fool, along with his Department of Education acting a fool. And what impact will it have on education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or any other state? Because guess what? Sometimes states follow states and rednecks follow rednecks. So I wouldn't be surprised at some point that some fool in Massachusetts, because it happens. Look at what happened in Massachusetts with, the recent decision on Harvard University. Yeah, the decision to stop affirmative action. That happened because of actually a Asian student wanting to have access to Harvard University, and he felt that he was being discriminated against. Why? Let me clean my glasses. Why? He felt he was being discriminated against. Now I can see. He felt that he was being discriminated against because of affirmative action. And he brought it all the way to the Supreme Court. Yeah, that was based out of, Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So there's always going to be some people that say something, and there's going to be some folks in Massachusetts that are going to kind of say, hey, you know what? I love what they have done in Florida. We should do the same thing in Massachusetts. It's coming, my good friends. It is coming. I guarantee that it's coming. Someone in Massachusetts is going to pull that same stuff. You know, I wanted to say something else. Well, as I said, the Education Commissioner, Manny Diaz, also earlier defended the proposal to begin to educate Black folks that when Black folks were enslaved, they were not merely victims. Yeah. Manny Diaz also defended the proposal, as I said, as age appropriate. We will go into some tougher subjects all the way into the beginning of the slave trade, Jim Crow laws, civil rights movement, and everything that occurred throughout our history. But we're going to make it revisionist history, my good friends. Revisionist history. They're going to revise education. That's what they're doing. Yeah, I remember Sparks, my good friend, flew at the board meeting on Wednesday where several teachers and Democratic state lawmakers in opposition to the standards tangled with policy makers ahead of the vote. If I were still a professor, I'd have to grade you incomplete, said Senator Geraldine Thompson, a former university lecturer. Incomplete. Right? Why incomplete? Can you go further than that, Geraldine Thompson? It's not incomplete. You get an E for effort, an E for everything. Or E or F. F is a total failure. And by the way, Florida is a total failure. That's all I can say, my good friends. Florida is a total failure. You can call in if you have a thought on this one. I'm sure you do. But if you don't, I understand. But if you come on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or the other 30 platforms that we have on all things Black politics, don't forget to make a comment. Share the post. Again, this is Leon Rock, and I'm the host of All Things Black Politics live here from Washington, D.C. We have been talking ad nauseum about Ron DeSantis and his wild and crazy thoughts about Black history or American history. He's a disgrace, my good friends. And with coming of that disgrace is something that is important for all of us to understand, is that he wants to be president. He wants to be president of the United States. And all I can say is what is going on with Black America that we can't come together as Black folks to say this is wrong. But hold on and wait a minute. Hold on and wait a minute. There's something going on in Black America right now. And I have to say, it's positive about this whole Ron DeSantis situation. The National Action Network has had a rally in Tallahassee about this particular issue. You see, the same day that the Florida Board of Education approved the controversial curriculum on African American history, over protests from critics about the victim shaming, outdated language, and the erasure of Florida's role in slavery. Oh, by the way, they don't want to say in Florida that they had a role in slavery and the oppression of Black folks in this country for many a year, let's say hundreds of years. Yeah. But thank God there's someone or a group that is taking Ron DeSantis on. And by the way, appropriately so. You see, the Black Fraternal Order of Kappa Alpha Phi has denounced the policies coming from the state and its governor. You see, Kappa Alpha Phi, one of the oldest and largest Black fraternity organizations in the country, announced at a press conference that they are joining a broad coalition of organizations in solidarity against the insensitive, discriminatory, and racist policies being promoted by the state of Florida and by the governor, Ron DeSantis, and his allies. The organization held a press conference on Thursday at the fraternity's 86th Grand Chapter meeting in Tampa. Over 20,000 people have attended this annual convention. Governor Ron DeSantis' efforts to erase Black history by eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and advanced placement of African American studies courses in Florida schools is a vivid reminder, they say, that our work in the vanguard for social justice in America continues, said John Polmarch. Reuben A. Shelton III, leader of the national organization, who said in the press release, "Our work for justice is perpetual. These actions compel us to work harder to protect the legacy of those who have struggled and died to make a more perfect union," he said. Fact is that Kappa Alpha Phi is the second oldest existing Black Greek letter organization and one of the nation's pan-Hellenic councils, or what is called the Divine Nine, founded in 1911 at Indiana University at Bloomington, Indiana, during a time of intense racial discrimination and Black students with a tiny minority in the campus and the state stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan. So understand our history, my good friends. Kappa Alpha Phi was created actually in 1911 at Indiana University at Bloomington, Indiana. Actually, Indiana was the stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan. We should know that as part of our own history. But guess what? If given the opportunity, Ron DeSantis and the folks in Florida wouldn't want you to know that history. That's a fact. And the other fact is that during the meticulation of lynching, it was common practice in Indiana to lynch folks, my good friends, in Indiana as well. Blacks could go weeks without seeing another Black person on campus back in the day. According to the fraternity's website, Blacks were not allowed to reside on campus dormitories and were not afforded off-campus accommodations, and then also were denied use of all the university's facilities and were barred from participating in contact sports, track and field, and other sports which Blacks were able to demonstrate, their skills. Two students, this is an interesting report. Two students, Elder Watson Diggs and Brian Kenneth Armstrong, had attended Howard University, HU, and were inspired by the first and only Black Greek letter fraternity at the time, Alpha Phi Alpha. They met with 8 other men to organize their own fraternity to promote the spiritual, social, intellectual, moral welfare of its members, according to the 5 objectives of the organization. So there's a proud history of this organization, Kappa Alpha Phi, and they have over 250,000 members with 643 undergraduate and alumni chapters in nearly every state in the United States, international chapters, in Dubai, the Bahamas, Bermuda, Canada, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Germany, Barbados, Bahamas, Japan, South Korea, Nigeria, South Africa, and U.S. Virgin Islands. So this is a powerhouse of 250,000 members across the country, and thank goodness they are raising the issue about what is going on in California. And by the way, every African-American organization should be doing the same thing. Every African-American organization needs to be doing the exact same thing that Kappa Alpha Phi is doing. It's a disgrace what is going on in Florida. Yes, I am paying attention to this particular topic because it's so important. It's about our education, my good friends. Gene McGuire taught me that early, Dr. Gene McGuire. And thank you for teaching me very early that education is critically important. Mel King taught me that education is so important. There's so many folks that don't address education in our country. Talking about, again, Governor DeSantis, Ron DeSantis out there in Florida, and his administration talking about banning the National Advanced Placement course of African American Studies over topics such as Black Lives Matter, Black feminism, and reparations due to the governor's what he calls principled stand for education. Over identity politics. When did Black history become identity politics? When? as I've been reporting, Commissioner Diaz appointed, that's the Florida Education Commissioner, Diaz appointed a task force to create a separate African-American history curriculum. But opponents quickly pointed out several issues, including, among other things, here's the deal. Elementary and middle school students in Florida are not required to learn about African-American history past Reconstruction. Did you hear me? Elementary and middle school students are not required to learn African-American history past Reconstruction. Middle school curriculum includes a benchmark clarification that states instruction includes how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Yeah, master. You asking me to get out there and pick some cotton for 18 hours a day. I'm getting personal benefit out of that. Yeah, master. You want me to pick some tobacco? I'm getting some personal benefit out of that. Yeah, master. I'm going to cook some food for you and all the workers. And because I learned how to cook some food for you, that's a personal benefit. Thank you, master. Oh, and I could keep on going on, my good friends. I could keep on going on. Here's the other thing. In high school, when learning about the Okie Massacre, the largest incidents of voting day violence in U.S. history, when a mob of white people killed Black community members and burned down their houses after a Black man tried to vote. The state now says that you have to instruct to include acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. So when the Black folks were defending themselves in Florida's education system, well, Black folks were perpetrating violence. Can you believe that, my good friends? That Black folks were perpetrating violence. This is All Things Black Politics, live here from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Leon Rock, and I'm fired up today. Why am I fired up? Is because of what I have been reading and what I've been hearing about Florida. And as I said earlier, I do have family in Florida, love them. But watch out in Florida, my good friends, because there's something going on in Florida. It must be in the water. It must be in the water. Because anytime educators have the audacity to say that we're going to teach white, Black, and Latinos and others about the true history of America, and that slavery was all right. And actually, slavery was more than all right. It provided opportunities for the slaves to develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their own personal benefit. Oh, there's more, my good friends. There are lots of opponents to this washout, this ugliness. Yeah, the opponents of the curriculum include omitting person first language and calling enslaved people slaves, and mentioning the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education, but not including it in a benchmark clarification that in 1957, the Florida legislature passed a resolution in opposition to the decision that ended legal segregation in the schools, or that Florida ceded the Union during civil rights. Yeah, well, civil war, not civil rights, civil war. Yeah. Did you hear me? Florida, as you know, and by the way, if you were taught well, you know that during the Civil War, there were states that ceded the Union, just left the United States and became essentially a de facto country. The war between the states, the North and the South. And the South was part, Florida was part and still remains part, obviously, the South, but it ceded from the Union. And in Florida, the legislature passed a resolution opposing the end of legal segregation, but they don't want to talk about that because they say it's woke. Well, all I can do is say this, is that we in the African-American community need to stay informed and in actuality woke. And wokeness means that not only are you learned about what is going on inside and outside of your community, but we are taking positive action to create social change. Now, education change as well. This is All Things Black Politics. This has been another broadcast of Boston Black News. I'm your host, Leon Rock, and I will see you at 11 a.m. next Friday, in which we talk about politics, and more politics. I will see you next week, 11 a.m. Peace.